This is how empires fall. The Chinese Communist Party has been running an unprecedentedly brutal campaign of persecution against its own citizens. What's really happening in China right now? Why are people suddenly so afraid of the Chinese government? And why do they have every right to be afraid? How does this relate to the collapse of other great empires before it? And how can we learn from history to better understand what's going on today? This is the story of how empires fall. And this is why China is next. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome to our community of scholars. We would love to have you join us in our mission to help you and others think better, so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So hit that subscribe button, so you don't miss out on future uploads. In our last video, we talked about how propaganda works. We explained that one of the ways that authoritarians control their populations is by producing and disseminating propaganda that promotes their ideologies and demonizes those who oppose them. In a world where only one narrative is allowed to exist, it's easier for the authorities to control the masses. In order to maintain power, authoritarian regimes, like that of the Chinese Communist Party, depend on maintaining a constant climate of fear. The worst thing that could happen for them is a population that is well-informed and politically engaged. They prefer people who are kept in the dark and too afraid to speak out. After all, it's difficult to organize and revolt when you're constantly looking over your shoulder. It's hard to demand change when you live in a perpetual state of anxiety. The worst nightmare of any authoritarian regime is a population that knows their rights and isn't afraid to use them. For example, consider what happened in Ukraine. For years, the Russian government had been building up its military forces along the Ukrainian border, preparing the ground for a full-scale invasion. As the world watched in suspense, Ukrainians across the country began to resist. They organized themselves into neighborhood militias and defended their cities against the Russian onslaught. It was a brave and inspiring sight to behold. But what makes the Ukrainian resistance particularly remarkable is that it didn't start with the invasion. It started long before. Ordinary citizens took matters into their own hands long before the first Russian soldier set foot on Ukrainian soil. They knew their rights. They weren't afraid to use them. And as a result, they were able to defend their country from an unjust aggressor. Authoritarians want people who can be manipulated, who will blindly obey orders without questioning them. They do not want people who know their rights, or who are willing to stand up for what they believe in. They want people who are afraid, and so that's what they try to create. One of the most effective ways of doing this is by rewriting history. Authoritarians want people who will accept their version of events without question, who won't challenge the official narrative or ask uncomfortable questions. They want people who are afraid to think for themselves. And so that's what they try to make them. Now let's take a look at what's happening in China right now. Over the past few months, the Chinese Communist Party has been running an unprecedentedly brutal campaign of persecution against its own citizens. People have been arrested for simply posting messages on social media platforms that criticize the government. Others have been detained for sharing news articles or videos that are critical of the CCP. Even those who have no political aspirations whatsoever have been targeted. People who just want to live their lives and mind their own business. But the CCP doesn't want people like that. It wants people who are afraid. And so that's what it's trying to create. One of the most effective ways of doing this is by rewriting history. When the Cultural Revolution was at its height, the CCP encouraged people to turn against their families if they had relatives who were labeled as enemies of the state. This created a climate of suspicion and paranoia and resulted in many innocent people being persecuted. During the Cultural Revolution, the CCP also promoted a cult of personality around Mao Zedong. People were expected to venerate him and his memory, and to see him as a kind of semi-divine figure. Anyone who dissented against the official line was denounced as a counter-revolutionary and subjected to brutal punishments. So how does this relate to what's happening today? Well, in recent months, The CCP has launched a campaign to purge what it sees as subversive elements from society. This includes not only dissidents and activists, but also academics, journalists, and even ordinary citizens who have criticized the government online. The party has detained hundreds of people without charging them with a crime, and has subjected them to forced disappearances. Others have been given long prison sentences for nothing more than expressing their opinions. This is happening all across China, in cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Chengdu. People have been rounded up for simply sharing news articles or videos that are critical of the CCP. Even those who have no political aspirations whatsoever have been targeted. People who just want to live their lives and mind their own business. But the CCP doesn't want people like that. It wants people who are afraid. And so that's what it's trying to create. One of the most effective ways of doing this is by rewriting history. The Chinese Communist Party has recently launched a campaign to rewrite history and control the narrative around the Cultural Revolution. The party has produced a series of films and TV shows that glorify the Cultural Revolution and its leaders, as well as documentaries that attack those who suffered during the era. This campaign is part of a broader effort to silence dissent and eliminate any memory of the atrocities that occurred during the Cultural Revolution. By controlling the narrative around this dark chapter in China's history, the CCP is able to maintain its grip on power and prevent any meaningful discussion of human rights or democracy. In a recent speech, President Xi Jinping called on young people to learn from the experience of the Cultural Revolution and warned against the dangers of Western influence. He specifically mentioned the importance of upholding the leadership of the Communist Party and the need to be wary of so-called bourgeois liberalization. These comments are part of a wider campaign to tighten control over Chinese society and prevent any challenge to Xi Jinping's authority. The CCP is particularly concerned about the influence of social media and the Internet, which have been used to organize protests and disseminate information outside the party's control. In response, the party has launched a major crackdown on online dissent, shutting down websites, censoring social media posts, and even jailing bloggers and journalists. Why are people so afraid of the Chinese government right now? Why are they so afraid? Because the Chinese Communist Party is running an unprecedentedly brutal campaign of persecution against its own citizens. People have been arrested for simply posting messages on social media platforms that criticize the government. Others have been detained for sharing news articles or videos that are critical of the CCP. Even those who have no political aspirations whatsoever have been targeted. People who just want to live their lives and mind their own business are afraid because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want people like that. It wants people who are afraid. And so that's what it's trying to create. One of the most effective ways of doing this is by rewriting history. Now, empires fall for a variety of reasons, but one of the most common is when the ruling class becomes out of touch with the needs and aspirations of the people. When this happens, the legitimacy of the government is called into question, and the empire begins to decline. The Chinese Communist Party is increasingly becoming out of touch with the Chinese people. The party's policies are seen as outmoded, and its leaders as corrupt and decadent. This growing disconnect has led to a number of protests and riots in recent years, and the CCP's response to these disturbances has been brutal. The party has cracked down on activists, shut down websites, and censored social media posts in an effort to maintain control. But these measures have only served to make the situation worse. The Chinese people are more disillusioned with the CCP than ever before, and the party's legitimacy is hanging by a thread. As the CCP tightens its grip on power, the Chinese people are becoming more and more desperate. Many are risking everything to flee the country and seek asylum elsewhere. However, as we have seen, the CCP's reach is long and its agents are everywhere. Escaping the clutches of the Chinese Communist Party is extremely difficult. Those who do manage to escape often face a life of poverty and hardship in their new home countries. With no rights and no protections, They are at the mercy of their employers and landlords. Many are forced to work long hours for little pay and live in squalid conditions. Despite the hardships, people still try to escape the Chinese Communist Party because the alternative is simply too terrible to contemplate. Life under the CCP is a life of fear, oppression, and misery. If you thought this video was eye-opening, you'll want to check out another video we did, How Propaganda Works. Understanding propaganda is essential in these turbulent times. Knowing how propaganda works allows us to spot it more easily and become more resilient to its effects. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support and hope that you continue to join us in our mission to help you and others think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times.